This is Talk of the City on 89.3 KPCC, Southern California Public Radio. I'm Kitty Feldy, and for the past 2 months, we have been learning about the history and theology surrounding the 7 deadly sins. Originally, they were guidelines for those living the monastic life, warning signs of the paths of sinfulness. Lust, believe it or not, is number 7 on the list, the least worrisome to Pope Gregory, who created the Big 7. And so we have finally arrived at lust, which Merriam-Webster defines as intense or unbridled sexual desire. Another definition, an inordinate craving for the pleasures of the body. A little later on, we will take a look at the biology and brain chemistry of lust, and we'll speak about some sociological variations on the old image of male construction workers verbally harassing female passers-by. Well, we always begin our conversations about the 7 deadly sins by taking a look at the theological side. In other words, what were people thinking when they were coming up with this list to begin with? Today we are turning to Jonathan Kirsch, who has been thinking a lot about the Old Testament. His books include The Harlot by the Side of the Road, Forbidden Tales of the Bible, and King David, the Real Life of the Man Who Ruled Israel. He's a book critic for the Los Angeles Times, as well as an attorney in private practice. Jonathan Kirsch, welcome back to Talk of the City.
I'm thrilled to be with you.
So help us out a little bit with lust as defined in the Old Testament.
Well, lust is not a term that's used in the Old Testament in a strictly sexual sense. The authors of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, often use the term lust metaphorically to condemn men and women who lust after the gods and goddesses of the pagan world. They often use a sexual metaphor, the metaphor of harlotry and seduction and adultery, to condemn the Israelites for being unfaithful to the true God of Israel. It's in the New Testament that we begin to see specific condemnations of lust in the sense of carnal sexual longing. And that's a very significant difference, because in the Hebrew Bible, one could make the argument, and I must say I do make the argument in my books, that the Hebrew Bible is very forgiving of human lust. The best example being a man after God's own heart, King David.
Well, and I was thinking forgiving is hardly the word. It seems there's a whole lot of lust going on in the Old Testament.
It's filled with carnality. That's the theme of my book, The Harlot by the Side of the Road. Men and women encounter each other in sexual situations. They have lust for one another, and they act on that lust, and they get away without much censure or punishment. That's one of the what you might call the dirty little secret of the Bible. The Old Testament does not concern itself very deeply with expressions of human lust, and men and women are shown to act the way we know that they do act repeatedly.
Well, it's interesting as well when we're taking a look at this list of 7 deadly sins. Lust is at the bottom of the list. One would think it would be a little higher up, but no, even to the New Testament folks, it doesn't seem to be that bad a thing.
Well, it's curious that it would be so, because many of the other sins on the classic 7 cardinal sins are kind of hard to make out as sins. It's hard to think of sloth as a particularly reprehensible sin. Even gluttony, I know we punish ourselves in our culture for being overweight, but it's not often thought of as sinful. Lust is just no question that sexual longing is treated in our culture as a sinful act, something to be ashamed of. And, of course, I have my New Testament open to Matthew 28, which is the most famous pronouncement, thanks to Jimmy Carter, that just to look on a woman with lust in your heart is as if you have committed adultery with her. That's a much higher standard than the Hebrew Bible, and as Jimmy Carter famously said in his Playboy interview, you're an adulterer if you even think of sex, according to that formulation.
Well, and actually, a little later on this hour, we're going to talk about how the sexual revolution seems to have made it all right for women to speak openly in the sexual way about the opposite sex, but God help any man who does the same thing. We're going to talk about that later on this hour. But I'm wondering what Jewish law has to say. Where do you draw the line between simply being physically attracted to somebody and actually doing something that is harmful and seen as disrespectful to God?
Well, it's an excellent question. I want to emphasize the difference, the very startling difference between biblical law and biblical storytelling. Much of what we know and love in the Hebrew Bible it consists of the stories and tales that we read in Genesis, in Exodus, in the book of Samuel, which is the great life story of David. And we know much of what we know about the Bible from those books. And those books take a neutral or even arguably an approving view of human sexuality. The very first commandment that God is shown to make is, "Thou shalt be fruitful and multiply," which is a specific order to have sex. And he doesn't trouble himself with the concept of marriage at the moment he issues that commandment to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And so one of the values in the Hebrew Bible is the value of creating and sustaining human life, which necessarily involves sex. And so you see a lot of people having sex, making children, without any ill consequences. The other half is biblical law, and there it is much fussier, much more stricter, and there are some equally famous passages of the Bible that have to do with unambiguous commandments against homosexuality. The Hebrew Bible has long lists of who you can and cannot have sex with. These are basically the laws of incest, and it defines incest very broadly, so that if you read the book of Leviticus, which is the book of priestly law, you get a much different view of human sexuality, a much stricter and more disapproving view. It always amuses me that when you go from the Jewish tradition to the Christian tradition, which after all proposes that Jesus fulfilled the biblical law and replaced it, and that it was no longer necessary, for instance, to keep the dietary laws or to circumcise. But fundamentalists in Christianity and Judaism both still embrace the fussier laws against human sexuality, and it's often cited, this biblical law against homosexuality. But if you had to generalize, the laws against human sexual conduct focus on two ideas. One is sex must be for procreation. You shouldn't have sex with animals, and you shouldn't have sex with people of your own sex because it's not going to result in childbirth. And the other theme, as I've mentioned, is to enforce the rules against incestuous sexual relations.
So no stipulations about marriage, about monogamy?
Well, of course, the Ten Commandments says you should not commit adultery. That's certainly one of the fundamental biblical commandments. Although we have to pause and remind ourselves that adultery in Bible times was a very different notion, because men could have multiple wives. They could add wives at will. That's certainly what King David is shown to do. Whenever his eye falls on a comely woman, he made her his wife, and he had many wives. Solomon famously had 1,000 wives.
But of course, those women didn't have 1,000 husbands.
Exactly. A woman could only have one husband. That was the way of the world in Bible times. But men could have as many sexual partners as they wanted within marriage. And then there were instances. The title story in my book, The Harlot by the Side of the Road, is a story that illustrates a very curious institution of Bible times, where a woman who is widowed and left childless is not just allowed, but is entitled to have sexual relations with a male relative of her dead husband for the purpose of impregnating herself with a child, and then the Bible law created a legal fiction that child, who we would call a bastard, not a child born within marriage, that child would be deemed to be the offspring of the dead husband rather than the offspring of the surviving male relative, usually a brother or a father.
But all of these were set up really to help protect that widow, because she didn't have any legal status on her own.
Exactly right, and that's a very important point. And as a matter of fact, if I make a single point during our conversation today, I think that's the one that we should focus on. The Hebrew Bible says having sex is not in itself bad. Having sex outside of marriage is not in itself bad if it serves a higher purpose, and in this case, the higher purpose is a feminist purpose, championing the rights of a widowed and childless woman who, under Bible law, would have no other means of support. Women in a Bible times couldn't work. They couldn't, except under limited circumstances, inherit. And a woman either was under the protection of her father, her husband, or her son. If she had no husband and no son, she was in terrible peril. And I might add, apropos of the concerns of the day, that the woman on whom this story focuses, her name is Tamar, is a non-Israelite. She's an outsider. She's a Canaanite. You might call her the equivalent of the distinction between Jews and Arabs in the modern Middle East. And her rights were championed, even though she was not an Israelite woman. And the way they were vindicated was that a brother or a husband or a father of the dead man would go into that woman's tent and engage in sex with her and produce a baby. And that was considered to be a sacred obligation.
Well, let's flash forward to today, because certainly women have a lot more power over their own lives. So, what is how do you apply Jewish law when you're talking about sexual issues, specifically about lust, to modern day men and women?
Well, there are many ways of approaching the Bible, and I should say within fundamentalist Judaism, Jews who practice the strictest and most traditional form of Judaism, women are still very restricted in what they can do and where they can go and what roles they can play. They can, under traditional Bible law, they can be freely divorced, but by their husbands, but cannot divorce their husbands. There's a very elaborate set of rules of feminine hygiene, which essentially treat a menstruating woman as the equivalent of a leper, someone who needs to be excluded. And highly observant fundamentalist Jews will not touch a woman who is menstruating.
Yeah, but a lot of those seem to be cultural things from a time when, running water and hot water wasn't available to the common person.
Well, they're very old taboos, and hopefully we've grown beyond them. And I should say that within mainstream Judaism today, within the Jewish community, even the religious Jewish community, outside of fundamentalism, women are given much more latitude in terms of their personal freedom and their personal conduct, and I would say for most Jewish women, their sexual conduct as well. But if you go back to the literal word of Jewish law, which is enforced in some parts of the Jewish community, women are still under some very specific restrictions about what they can and cannot do, and the sexual revolution, such as it is, hasn't touched those corners of Judaism.
Well, Jonathan Kirsch, will you admit to lusting in your heart a couple of times in your life?
I'm happy to do that, just like Jimmy Carter. An underrated president and a good man.
A very good man. Jonathan Kirsch, thank you so much for spending time with us.
My great pleasure. Thank you. Jonathan
Kirsch is a book critic for the Los Angeles Times and an attorney in his real life, but he's also the writer of some wonderful books that take a look at Old Testament stories, The Harlot by the Side of the Road, Forbidden Tales of the Bible, and King David, the real side of the man who ruled Israel. When we come back, though, we're going to take this conversation to contemporary times and apply this concept of the 7 deadly sins, lust, and what does it mean to us today. This is 89.3 KPCC. Welcome back to Talk of the City on 89.3 KPCC, Southern California Public Radio. I'm Kitty Feldy, and before we leave the theological side of things, we are in the midst of the Jewish High Holy Days, and tonight at 9 we have a very special program called Remember Us Unto Life. And it's a conversation between Rabbi Ishmael Schorsch, who is Chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, and the host of the program, Larry Josephson. And they will be reflecting on the anniversary of September 11th, which fell right between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It'll also explore, of course, the history and liturgy of those two holidays, as well as their meaning in modern-day America. That's Remember Us Unto Life, a Jewish High Holy Day special, tonight at 9 here on 89.3 KPCC. And also an opportunity, we spoke yesterday on the program about volunteer opportunities related to September 11th. But here's one that, of course, will last through October. We are getting ready for our fall fund drive and would love to have you here helping us out, not just sending your dollars, but also here answering some phones and helping us get the forms in order and a little bit of data entry, stuff like that there. Come on down, see how live radio works, and spend some time with other people who love KPCC as much as you do. Call us now at 626-585-7000. or just send an email to volunteers@kpcc.org. Well, we are on our quest exploring our 7 deadly sins. We are at the end of the line exploring lust. And, as one who has tried many times, very unsuccessfully I might add, to fix up friends on blind dates, I have learned the hard way that you cannot predict physical desirability. Why are human beings attracted to some people and definitely not to others? Well, joining me, a pair of experts. Helen Fisher is a research professor and member of the Center for Human Evolutionary Studies in the Department of Sociology at Rutgers University in New Jersey. Her PhD dissertation was on the evolution of human female sexuality. Professor Fisher, thanks for being with us.
Oh, I'm delighted. Thank you.
Also with us here in studio, Diane Halperin, who's a professor of psychology at Claremont McKenna College and director of the Berger Institute for Work, Family, and Children. Professor Halperin, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let me start with you, Professor Fisher, and what do we know about the biology of attraction?
Well, actually, that's what I'm studying. I am currently putting people who are madly in love into a functional MRI brain scanner to see if we can't find the actual circuits that light up in the brain when you actually fall in love with somebody. But the question that you asked before is, why do we fall in love with one person rather than another?
Yeah.
And that's a different question. And I've noticed exactly the same thing with you. I get two people, I think they're perfect for each other, and it doesn't work out at all. The reason I think does not have to do with biology. By the way, I'm an anthropologist rather than a sociologist. But anyway, I think it has less to do with biology than it has to do with your upbringing. As small children, we sort of grow up making a list, an unconscious list of things that we're looking for in a mate. They call it your love map. And then when the sex season really begins in teenage and you walk into a room and there's 4 men in the room, let's say, or 4 boys, and one of them it just is perfectly right for you, and the other three are perfectly lovely people, but don't turn you on, it's probably because that one has hooked somehow into this love map in the brain. For example, you grow up getting used to certain kinds of sense of humor, certain ways, the amount of chaos in the house, the amount of unpredictability, the way people dress and handle themselves, certainly. And a perfect example of this is the young girl who grows up with an alcoholic father and says she's never going to marry somebody like dear old dad. But she gets used to the unpredictability around the house. She gets used to saving the day, etc. And then she grows up and she doesn't marry an alcoholic, but she picks an unpredictable artist instead, because there's deep undercurrents of expectations in relationships that we sort of evolve, and as we mature, they become part of this love map.
Well, now, I'm going to take this to a very personal level. I mean, I used to always date guys who you could probably predict why I would date guys. But when I met my husband, I was physically attracted to this man. We were in a church situation. It was a retreat over the weekend. He had a terrible reputation. I knew he was dating half the women that I knew at the retreat. You know, and so I'd written him off to begin with. He was also irresponsible. He showed up 4 or 5 hours late for this thing because he didn't buy the change you needed to get on your tires to get up in the snowstorm. And he was from the Midwest, and I knew he was being, I'm from the Midwest.
Has he changed?
Yes, somewhat.
Good.
Somewhat.
So that gives me hope. Go ahead.
But here's the point, is like the reason, it was like immediate. I hugged him at one point during one of the ceremonies we were doing, and it was like the movies. There were lightning bolts that went off in the room. Now, I don't know that he was attracted to me the same way, but this was so unlike my character. Mm-hmm. I would always have my little criteria of the guy I was going to date. He didn't fit with any of those.
Well, timing is absolutely everything. The perfect person can come and sit on your lap, and if the timing is wrong for you, it doesn't work. And if the timing is right for you, people get ready to fall in love. And then, sure enough, the next person that comes by, as long as they fit somewhere in that love map, they would do. And also, novelty. You seem to have been in a place that was novel and unusual, that drives up levels of dopamine in the brain. Dopamine, I think, is associated, I'm going to actually end up saying that it's associated with romantic love. And that here you were in an unpredictable situation. The dopamine was already high. You were ready to fall in love. And there were probably a lot of things about him that did fit into your love map. Either he had the right kind of sense of humor, he was dressed properly, he smiled and flirted with you in the right way. Something turned you on that sparked that emotion system in the brain, and you fell in love.
What about pheromones? Because there's that famous Swiss study that exposed women to a bunch of sweaty T-shirts and found out which one they were attracted to.
Well, we are basically a visual creature. I mean, they call it love at first sight, not love at first smell. And it's because, we spent millions of years in the trees, our ancestors did, and along with all of that time of living in the trees, we developed an enormous part of the brain, which is the visual system, and the smell system really reduced. And so I basically think that the smell of somebody can turn you off, definitely, but it's or turn you on, but I don't think that is what captures you from across a crowded room. You see somebody, the way they handle their body, their postures, their gestures, their tone of voice is important, and the timing's got to be right, and if they fit just a little bit in that love map, you'll fall in love.
Professor Halperin, what else do we know about why we're attracted to particular people and not to others?
Well, I was thinking about your example about the pheromones and smell. It's also important to remember that those smells that attract or repel us are also driven by our whole knowledge of the person. So there are studies that show that couples who are divorcing or not doing well find the scent of their partner increasingly unpleasant. So it's often, you don't always know which drove which when two things co-occur.
What about the other, there's another study out there that looks at symmetry and body form and how, again, we are attracted to someone who theoretically will help us make healthier babies. Who wants to answer that one? Professor Fisher?
Well, everybody in the world is attracted to symmetrical faces. This seems to be a human thing.
And then how do you explain people like Larry King?
He's rich. He's powerful.
I mean, there's a man without a
he
symmetrical
can be
face. He's been
very-
married how many times? How many children does this man have?
He can be very charming, and don't forget that for millions of years it was probably adaptive to have children with a lot of different spouses, and so he's actually followed a. I mean, I'm not encouraging it by any means, but I mean, if he had children by a lot of women, he's created more genetic variety in his lineage, and from a Darwinian perspective, he won.
Professor Halpern?
Yeah, it's also, remember that there's a difference between lust, love, and the people we might choose to marry and stay with a long time, and they're not all the same phenomena. We are also attracted to people who are wealthy, who are powerful in a number of ways, which is why a lot of, look at some people in government who clearly wouldn't be attractive for other ways, who are attracting a great many women, and it's not. It's more than any one simple phenomenon like symmetry of body.
Well,
I'd like to just add to that and also just say hello to Diane, because I've so appreciated reading your literature for so long.
Well, thank you. I've been a big fan of your work also. We can just do this.
But anyway, I basically think we've as Diane has just said, I think we've evolved three basically different emotion systems in the brain for mating and reproduction. One is lust, or the sex drive, the craving for sexual gratification. The second emotion system in the brain being romantic attraction, that elation, giddiness, euphoria of first love. And the third emotion system being attachment, that sense of calm and peace and security that you can feel for a long-term partner. They're very different emotion systems. They can trigger each other, but they can also act independently.
Well, there's the other one, too, I think about, and it's that sense of infatuation, and it's so different from everything else.
It's part of romantic love. I mean, I think it's within the range of romantic love. If you look it up actually in the dictionary, it says a sort of a giddiness and a longing and a craving for a human being, and I think it's part of it's part of romantic love. We often look down on that word as if it's sort of a minor kind of feeling, but it can develop into a profound romantic love for somebody.
We're taking a look at this idea of physical attraction, that side of lust, and our guests are Professor Diane Halpern from Claremont McKenna and Professor Helen Fisher from Rutgers University. Our phone number is area code 866-893-5722 if you'd like to jump into this conversation about what it is that attracts us to one another. 866-893-5722. This is Talk of the City on 89.3 KPCC. Welcome back to Talk at the City on 89.3 KPCC, Southern California Public Radio. I'm Kitty Feldy, and John Masheri and the Hollywood Bowl Orchestra present the fireworks finale, A Dream of Africa, featuring the legendary South African singer Miriam Makeba. It's a KPCC-sponsored Sunday night sunset performance this Sunday night at 7:30 at the Bowl. It will be introduced by our own Larry Mantle, and here is your opportunity to see the final performance of the season under the stars at the Bowl. If you haven't had a chance to get out there all summer, summer is gone. This is your last chance. And if you're one of the first 10 listeners who hasn't won anything from KPCC in the last 30 days, give us a call, 626-585-7893, and you will receive a pair of tickets to see the fireworks finale, A Dream of Africa, at the Hollywood Bowl. And remember, don't be greedy. If you've won anything in the last 30 days, sift this one out. Again, that number is 626-585-7893. We are on our quest to finish our exploration of the 7 deadly sins, and it's lust this week, the bottom of the list, and we are talking about the physiology, the biology of lust. What is it about us that makes us attracted to other people? With us, Helen Fisher, professor at anthropology at Rutgers University, and Diane Halperin, a professor of psychology at Claremont McKenna College. And I'm curious, we've talked about different kinds of love, but I want to stick with the lust side of things and ask whether women are different than men when it comes to lust. Professor Fisher?
I think that the more powerful women become in this century, the more we're going to begin to understand female sexuality. And I really honestly don't think we really understand it very well. But from my looking at the literature, I do think that men and women really are quite different. For example, men are really focused on orgasm, generally, whereas women sort of embed sex within a much broader contextual thing. The music and the dancing and the fancy dinner and the conversation are all sort of almost involved in it. That's one difference. In terms of actual copulation, women have a more intense sex drive. Men think about sex more regularly. The most recent sex surveys in 1994, the NORC survey it's called, says that men think of about 54% of American men think about sex every day, whereas only 19% of women think about sex every day. But there's problems with that. I mean, women come from a long tradition of being sexually curtailed, and men come from a long tradition of sexual bragging. So there's a lot that we just don't know yet about female sexuality. But I do think that somewhere in middle age, the sexes become actually quite similar. As levels of testosterone go down in men, and levels of estrogen go down in women, I think the sexes begin to become more similar sexually.
Professor Halpern?
Yeah, I'm often asked questions about, whatever a phenomenon is, are women and men similar or different? And the answer almost invariably is both. I like to prefer to think of it as how are they similar, how are they different, when are they similar? Certainly if you look at reports of what people say they do or say they feel or any kind of objective data, there are very large differences in the sexual behaviors of women and men. If you ask them about fantasies, those sorts of things, you get differences. But, as Helen noted, they're very, how accurate, how our reports are colored by expectations, by societal rules. Good women, don't discuss these things. Good women are, traditionally more asexual, more passive, differences in communication styles. So, we really would have to say we don't have the good data because they're always bound in a context.
I'd like to take some calls. 866-893-KPCC is our phone number. Out in Claremont, Stephen is with us. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Kitty. I've always instinctively felt that a relationship had those three phases of lust, infatuation, and contentment. But I'm in a 16-year-old relationship that seems stuck in infatuation.
That's wonderful.
So stop bragging, Stephen. How'd you do it?
I don't know. We were college sweethearts. Maybe it's lucky that he's a gymnast and still has that gymnast body.
So you're admitting there's a definite physical quality to all of it.
definitely. But even after 16 years and having 3 boys, there's still that physical attraction that hasn't faded yet.
And apparently you've kept up your side of the bargain, too.
I do what I can.
I think that happens. You're talking about two things here. You're talking about the sex drive, obviously, but you're also talking about continuing to be in love with this woman, your wife, right?
Actually, a man, my partner, but yes, we are still in love.
Well, I certainly know about people like that. It's something that I want to eventually study in the brain, because, often when you move into that stage of attachment, it's a sense of calm and peace and security. And you can have returning periods, for example, of infatuation when you go on a vacation, when you do new things together. The trick to maintaining that, and this is probably what you do naturally, is to do novel things together. And when you do novel things together, it drives up levels of dopamine in the brain, and and you can feel that feeling of romantic love. So there's ways to keep love alive, and it's lovely to hear somebody who's doing it.
Professor Halpern?
Yeah, it's terrific. I'm happy for Stephen and his partner. And relationships, wax and wane over decades. And certainly people into very old age are in love and in lust with, often their lifelong partner. Not every day, but, in various up and down sorts of periods. Another problem, of course, is everyone wants to know about their relationship. Mm-hmm. And what we know in our data is about averages. And we know that there's tremendous variability. So it's always hard to take, the empirical data and say, how does this apply to me and my partner, or, those sorts of things.
866-893-KPCC. Bill is in Los Angeles. Hi, Bill.
Hi.
Thanks for calling.
Well, I appreciate the time. I was thinking about my question as I was waiting, and the physiological aspects of lust. Could it be anything related to modeling that we get when we're children? The physiological need to model after our parents. And my original question was to you, Kitty, was how much like your father is your husband in both physical and emotional traits?
Well, the scariest thing is he's a whole lot more like my mother in his temperament. I mean, in his organizational stuff and all that kind of stuff. Temperamentally, it's much more my mother. Physically, I don't. They're not. He's taller than my dad. No, I mean, I physically more resemble my father in a lot of ways. So I don't know. But let's ask the experts about what that usually happens. What are you usually looking at? Professor Fisher?
Well, I mean, I think that, the sex drive is associated with testosterone, and both men and women have testosterone. Men tend to have a lot more, but whether it reacts a lot more in the brain, we really don't know. So, and I do think that you inherit levels of testosterone. I mean, I don't think that we know that you inherit levels of testosterone, and that, if your parents have a high sex drive, you may well have a high sex drive too.
But are we usually attracted to the physical type of our opposite sexual parent?
That's a very popular thing these days, and I think Diane would have more of a comment on it.
Yeah, she's shaking her head. Professor Halpern?
Yeah. It's very easy to take almost any kind of hypothesis and then read into it and find evidence for it, because we can always find something about our opposite sex parent that looks like our current partner. But I don't think there's any very good data, because it may not be a physical thing that we've learned. They need not necessarily be the same size or muscle shape, but it may be, certainly it is in part learned.
My guests are Professor Diane Halpern from Claremont McKenna and Professor Helen Fisher from Rutgers University in New Jersey. Bill, thanks for your call, 866-893-KPCC. But when we come back, I want to shift the conversation just a little bit and talk about a phenomenon that I have noticed lately about women and lust, and being a little vocal about it. This is 89.3 KPCC, broadcasting from studios at Pasadena City College. Welcome back to Talk of the City on 89.3 KPCC, Southern California Public Radio. I'm Kitty Feldy, and we have reached the end of our discussions about the 7 deadly sins. It is lust this week, and our last exploration of lust is actually more on the topic of political correctness, and it is directed to us of the female gender here. Now, yes, there are still Neanderthal guys out there who act like Stanley Kowalski when they get around the female sex. But on the whole, men have learned that they act like sexist pigs at the peril of their career, their love life, and their place in society. But over the past few years, I have noticed the turnaround is fair play. I have overheard, and I admit it, yes, participated in more than a few conversations about the physical attributes of the opposite sex. Now, we're not exactly hooting from the scaffolding at the postman walking by, but comments have been made aloud about the posterior of a particular Dodger player, or the hunky quality of the publicity photo of a particular writer on tour, or perhaps just general musing aloud about why the box boys at Trader Joe's are so darn sexy. I guess we could say women are pigs too. We admit it. But I wonder how long we're going to be able to get away with it. And that's the question I pose to you out there, 866-893-KPCC, as well as to our two experts, Professor Helen Fisher from Rutgers and Professor Helen Halperin from Claremont McKenna. And I'll start with you, Professor Halperin.
Yes, that's an interesting question. It's Diane.
I'm sorry.
No problem. You're talking about the difference between lust and communicating lust. And I think the real question is, has there been a change in how people communicate their lust? Certainly groups of women, there's safety in groups, will giggle and chat together and, make comments about other people's bodies. That's a very safe environment. That's very different from hooting at somebody on the street. Which is still considered inappropriate behavior.
Although I have seen women in mixed groups making these similar comments. I mean, it helps to have several women in the group. But even if there's a guy there doesn't seem to be any kind of societal, don't do that in front of the guys kind of quality yet. Yet, and that's the word I use, yet.
And I'd also be careful about generalizing from, our groups in Southern California to the rest of the United States or even beyond. It's very much context dependent how we communicate.
Well, let's throw it to the East Coast, Professor Fisher. Are they quite as vocal on the East Coast in the female side of things?
Well, I do think that we're going to see more women harassing men. As more and more women pile into the job market, I think that and women, and by the way, female sexual expression is becoming more and more powerful around the world. I mean, there's a great many social trends that are indicating that women are going to express their sexuality more and more. For example, women express their sexuality when in a more urban society. We're going to a more urban world. In a more secular society, the world is becoming more secular. In smaller families, in higher divorce, where women are healthier, they are more sexual. And women are becoming healthier around the world. Where women get sexual education, they express their sexuality, and on and on. There's many, many worldwide trends that are going to enable women to express their sexuality, and I do think that women have just as high a sex drive as men during most of their lives. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to see more women harassing men, but I'm not sure they're going to be catcalling them in the street, just the way Diane said. I don't think that's women's style. I think they're going to do it subtly and probably in a very dangerous way. Let's say if a woman is a boss at the office and she sort of starts to put the make on a younger man who's a coworker, and he suddenly feels he's got to go out with her because he's going to lose his job, that kind of thing. But yes, I think that women are talking more about men. I know something else from talking to some people in the men's magazine world, and what they're basically saying is now women are beginning to demand, tell men what they want in bed. They're beginning to say, this is how you can please me, and this is what I'd like to have. And in some ways, I think we're going to get some of the bad with some of the good. I think women are going to begin to express themselves, and in many cases, this is going to be very good, and some others, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Well, and again, I think what I'm talking about is that area between sexual harassment and having a frank conversation about sex one-on-one with a partner. Mm-hmm. What I'm talking about is conversations about sexual attributes of the opposite sex, or I guess if you were lesbian, about other women, in public. And those are conversations that today, if men have those conversations about women in public, they are immediately shunned by current society.
Men are scared to death right now. I mean, we are really, I think, in our society going through a case of an era of male bashing, and I think that men sense that, and I see it in the audiences when I make public speeches that something will be said, and the men don't actually even dare defend themselves because they've been so hammered, which you can understand. I mean, we've come from a long, long tradition of men having a tremendous amount of power and women being sort of closeted in the kitchen and in the nursery. And as we see, I think, in my book, The First Sex, I basically say that I think we're moving towards what I call a collaborative society in which the talents of both men and women are going to be understood and employed. And along with that, we are going to see more women coming up and probably being harassing.
Well, again, I'm wondering about how long it's going to be until it is politically incorrect for women to make these kinds of comments aloud. I mean, I'm surprised sometimes at what I can get away with. And I mean, I say it and I'll say, if I were a guy, I would be slammed to the ground. And yeah. I'm always amazed, and I'm wondering if we are in a grace period, so to speak, that because women have put up with so much garbage for so long, it's like, okay, we'll let the girls have a little time, But I'm wondering when that time period is going to run out.
Well, it's tied with issues of power, because the person who makes those comments has to be is the more powerful, and certainly women are achieving higher positions of power. So statistically, you would certainly expect there's going to be more. It's also tied in the very large legal issues. Mm-hmm. The number of law cases for sexual harassment has grown incredibly. So there's a number of things going on simultaneously. But and also a pendulum that swings a little bit in each way. And
I'm getting no calls from any women fessing up that they engage in this kind of activity, which I find interesting. 866-893-KPCC, 866-893-5722. Well, let us then just encompass our entire conversation this hour and go back to the phones and see where people are thinking about. Let's go out to Studio City. Debbie's with us. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, Kitty. Thanks for taking my call.
Debbie, are you going to confess, at least before we get back to the topic you wanted to talk about, that you engage in this kind of conversation in public?
Oh, absolutely I do.
Okay,
I try to be a bit discreet about it and not, not embarrass someone and make them feel uncomfortable, but certainly I do. And I think that women will continue to do that more, and we'll get off the hook about it until we are the population that's in control, that we have the power politically and financially. And right now, men aren't really that threatened by it because we don't have that power yet.
You wanted to ask something else, though. I'll let you do that.
Yes, I wanted to. I had a question about, and I just had this experience today. What is that thing, that energy, that spark that happens between two complete strangers? I was coming out of an elevator today earlier, and a man was coming in, and it was just like sparks, and complete strangers, and I didn't really even get a good look at him, but it was just like this energy thing, and I don't know. It happens every once in a while, but I would like for your guest to comment on that.
And I can say, Debbie, when I was going to interview Mario Andretti, and this was a few years ago, but he was still, old enough to be my almost grandfather. I have never felt such chemistry immediately. You walk in the door and there was just, wow, what is it about this person? All right, it's your turn, Professor Fisher. How do you explain that instant attraction, even if it's not Mario Andretti?
I think that it comes straight out of our animal past. I think that love at first sight, or this instant attraction, is something that comes with all. I mean, when you think of a squirrel, in the beginning of the breeding season, a squirrel has got to find another squirrel. She's got to do it rapidly. She can't get an interview with it. She doesn't have to, take it out on 15 days. She's got to, boom, feel attraction immediately. I call it animal magnetism, and I think that that love at first sight is the first thing, that animal attraction, and that suddenly the time is right, the person smiles at you in just the right way, you've never seen them before, you're in a public place so it's nice and safe, and they look at you in some way that you find instantly appealing, and then boom, it lights up that dopamine circuit in the brain, and you feel that incredible rush of energy, and that's what dopamine and norepinephrine are. They're systems in the brain associated with energy and drive and motivation and elation. So that's what happened to you, I think.
Professor Halpern, it's all biology, going back to our earliest ancestors.
Well, I have a hard time going from the squirrel to this woman's experience in leaving the elevator. Although certainly, I believe in evolution.
Maybe he had acorns in his back pocket.
Perhaps so. But I'm guessing that she didn't act on this. Is that correct?
I thought about it, but no,
But I guess not. I was guessing not.
It was an express elevator.
An express. There certainly is, that rush of attraction. I wouldn't use the word love for that, since most of our psychological theories of love would include some part of a commitment to it, and I doubt that you had that sort of feeling, but certainly a passion.
Debbie, have a good time on the next elevator ride. Maybe he'll be there again. Bye-bye. Steve out in Encino has a more sociological explanation for my query about why women get away with murder. Hi, Steve.
Hi. In fact, I came into the conversation late, so I apologize if I'm making a comment someone else did as well. But when you asked how long might this reversal of roles or last, it occurred to me that there's a parallel to this, perhaps, and that is African Americans in this country who 30, 40 years ago were not particularly expressive about in social situations, and now it seems the pendulum in the last 10, 20, 30 years, depending on what you use as a marker, has shifted dramatically, and it's okay particularly for African Americans compared to, I'm a fairly standard Caucasian kind of guy, and I know that there are things that I can't say, but African American friends of mine can, that they can be more expressive, more aggressive, almost to make up for the fact that they experienced this, let's say, oppression, because I want to use the same word that may apply also to women who are now coming into their own. So how long will it last? I don't know. How long will it last within the African American community? That may be a good measure, because women may be doing something similar.
Professor Fisher, Steve's take. How do you?
I'm glad he brought it up again. I think that it's going to end when women are just as powerful as men are, and everybody knows it, because powerful people can't get away with saying naughty things, and I think that it may take centuries.
All right.
Women, but the day will come, by the way. I am an anthropologist, and for millions of years on the grasslands of Africa, women were probably just as powerful as men were. They commuted to do their gathering of vegetables. They came home with much of the evening meal. They expressed their sexuality. And I think that as we leave the farming tradition behind, and as women pour into the job market around the world, which they're doing, they are rising in their economic status, and the day will come, I think, when we do see economic and political and social and sexual equality between the sexes. And at that point, I think that women will be regarded as just as tasteless as when they catcall as men.
Steve, thanks a lot for the call. Out in Ontario, Wayne is with us. Hi, Wayne.
Hi, Kitty. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. I love the conversation you're having. I just want to make kind of two comments. One is I appreciate and I really enjoy the sense of power that women now have, at least from what I've seen in the workplace. What tends to happen is, in my experience, is that as women enter the workplace and attain certain levels of power, or at least supervisory levels, if they can come in and open up the conversation of a sexual nature, that it tends to relieve a lot of tension. The men can't. Men are restrained. Men, in fact, are more restrained now, even when there are no women around. It used to be that, the gloves are off and there's no rules when there's no girls in the room. And that seems to no longer be the case.
That's interesting. Professor Halpern, is that...
Well, the professor in me, of course, wants to say, let's be careful to say some women. and not to say, this is true about women, this is true about men, because it's important to remember that, when he talks about the increasing power of women, women still are the bulk of people in poverty in the United States and around the world, and earn much less than men, and certainly don't have equal positions of power if you look at, leadership in government, corporate world, etc. And they're really in very few of those highest level positions. So I just want to caution that, we're always, and that's what I'm always doing, is reminding people that we mean some.
Well, also the idea is, sexual harassment laws apply to all, and in corporate situations, I think that there's that danger for men or women to tackle those kinds of things. But I do find it interesting that that is what people talk about. Let's quickly go to John in Ontario as well. Hi, John.
Hello. I just wanted to make one comment. I thought it's interesting what I saw in advertising along this vein. It was in PC Magazine, and they were advertising the space-saving desktop computer. They had a woman essentially on top of a guy on the desk groping him. And, I can't see them doing that the other way. A man groping a woman just wouldn't be allowed.
Let's get comments quickly from our professors. Professor Halpern?
No, you would never see that. They would never pass the test of what would sell computers. It's interesting that this is a way of selling computers, perhaps to men.
Oh, there you go, male fantasy. Professor Fisher?
You see a lot of this now on television. I mean, it's been quite a trend where they're serving breakfast cereal or something, and the man looks stupid and groggy, and the woman is alert and put together. I really think it's. I think you're onto a trend, Kitty, and I think that it's. I think it's. It's. I don't know if I want to say it's male bashing. I think some of these things are male bashing, and others are. It is really a sign of a change in the relationship between men and women.
Indeed it is, and vive la différence. I want to thank our experts here, Helen Fisher from Rutgers, her books, Anatomy of Love, A Natural History of Mating, Marriage, and While We Stray, and First Sex, The Natural Talents of Women and How They're Changing the World, and The Sex Contract, The Evolution of Human Behavior. And Professor Diane Halpern, her book, Sex Differences in Cognitive Abilities and Thought, and Knowledge and Introduction to Critical Thinking. This is 89.3 KPCC, Pasadena, Southern California Public Radio. Welcome to Studio 3, and we'll open with just a little music here. Welcome back to Talk of the City on 89.3 KPCC, Southern California Public Radio. I'm Kitty Feldy, and we move from the carnal qualities of this world to the spiritual musings of a more godly place This Saturday, the triannual World Festival of Sacred Music descends on Los Angeles. 55 events in 16 days at venues all over Southern California. We've just heard some lovely music from Prince Diabate, who is from Guinea in West Africa. He is joined by Bailo Ba, the flautist here, and Prince's cousin, Famoro Diabate. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in. Also here with us, Judy Matoma, who is director of the festival. Judy, welcome to Talk of the City.
It's so great to be here.
Help us out with the origins of this festival. It was an idea of the Dalai Lama?
Absolutely. In 1989, 98.
Excuse me, I'm just going to let that they are outside in the midst of all of this doing a little bit of pruning on the shrubbery outside of Studio 3, so we'll see if we can cut that off. But you go ahead and tell us about this. So this was an idea from the Dalai Lama from when?
98. He hoped that we could mark the new millennium with music as a peaceful, altruistic way to bring people together. And we in Los Angeles all got ourselves organized, and Prince Diabate was a very important part of that festival, and we're pleased that we not only successfully did this festival in 99, but we decided as a community that it was important to try to do this on a regular basis in a city like ours. And so here we are, 3 years after, about to launch our second World Festival of Sacred Music, and we hope to do it every 3 years if indeed the public wants such a thing.
And it's an amazing undertaking because you've got musicians and artists from all over the world, and you're performing all over Southern California.
We're so pleased by that, and especially at this time when there's so much tension in the world and the traveling between our countries is harder than ever. We are determined that this kind of cultural exchange is critical. It's also critical for the people of our city to cross lines of color and race and culture and to find a common ground so that we can understand our shared humanity.
Prince Diabate, tell us a little bit about the music that you play. Describe the instruments you're playing, first of all.
Yeah, my instrument is called Kora, C-O-R-A. It's the instrument for the Creole people in West Africa. And my cousin is playing the balafon,
which looks like a giant xylophone sitting here with wooden slats.
Yeah, he's playing the xylophone, so let's say xylophone.